Hello, everybody. Welcome to AdTECH New York, an extra slice. This is a common video that we do now a week or so after a big conference. We get a couple of the people who spoke and some of the attendees, maybe a sponsor or two to join us. So we're going to look back to AdTECH New York, which happened on October the 12th in Manhattan. With me, I've got Irina and Sean and Leslie. You probably know all of them by sight, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. So we'll start with Irina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Irina Zeltser, ad executive, media veteran, and also founder of Beach Street Communications. Spent 20 years in the out-of-home space. So I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Irina. You're not allowed to say you're a veteran, being a female. That's not allowed, especially so young looking.
Well, that's very kind of you. The wrinkles, right. It's good lighting.
Good lighting, good. Sean.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Sean McCaffrey. I'm president and CEO of Destination Media and GSTV.
Sean will blush because I always say that Sean's my favorite CEO in the industry, and GSTV, one of my favorite place-based media companies. Tell us a little bit about Destination Media, because that's a recent name change or group change. Just before we move to Leslie, just tell us a little bit about that, please.
It's actually not. We've just never put it forward beyond financial press. So GSTV is a national digital video platform, as you know, 205 markets, 116 million monthly unique viewers. We just announced a partnership with ChargePoint, the large DV provider in the EV infrastructure space. We'll be deploying an advertising supported platform with them as well. And then we've got a few more sort of irons in the fire, so to speak. So we're just being more present about Destination Media as the corporate brand. And then the various media platforms we operate within to give people a little easier context to understand who we are. So you'll hear more about us in the future to put a little more context around Destination Media.
Gotcha. Thank you, Sean. And last but not least, Leslie.
Hi, Adrian. Leslie Lee, SVP of Marketing at Vistar Media. We are a global programmatic technology platform and also have software solutions that power digital signage networks.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, thank you all for spending some time. We're not going to be very long. We know that you're busy people. Funny enough, you guys are all in New York today, which is strange. I suppose we're talking about New York, so maybe it's not that strange. But anyway, if you hear sirens and things going in the background, you know that these guys all live and work in Manhattan. That's one thing is for sure. Okay, let me get started then. So we had the conference. Irina, you spoke. You did a fantastic Women in Tech panel. Let's start there. What was your thinking behind the Women in Tech panel? It certainly went down very well, but tell us a little bit about it.
So, I mean, there's certainly, visible progress in the industry, and we're seeing more women joining the tech industry, more on the partnership side, sales. Clearly still not enough CTOs. I think I could probably name, 2 or 3, CTOs in the space. But nevertheless, it's a conversation that is a difficult one, but it's one that needs to be had. Gender diversity is really important for numerous reasons. Data clearly proves that when there are more female leaders in a company, there is a higher return when compared to companies that don't have female leadership. Whether it's empathy or, any other traits, they're quite beneficial for business, retaining talent. So it's a topic that we should be a bit more vocal with. I was very fortunate to be asked to curate this panel. I was very lucky to have Marcy, Susan, and Joanna take part in it and really share their stories. But the really interesting bit was what happened post-panel. There were certainly some great questions coming from your male audience, which was, very refreshing, and it showed that they were engaged. But in addition to that, I was also pinged separately to ask about, things that can be done in the short term, how to focus on more change and looking at organizations' composition when it comes to gender diversity. And so the fact that they're asking questions, and these questions are coming from male leaders, I think that we have a situation here where we can effectively create change. So we need to be doing more of this. I'm so pleased that we had this topic this year, and I'm pleased that you're doing it in LA again.
We are. Yeah.
And so we need to continue on the conversation. and really change it, because the gender gap is supposed to be bridged in 100 years. Why don't we see this change in this lifetime? So these conversations are quite beneficial in pushing things forward.
That's good. Well, thank you for doing that. Stephanie Gutnick, the head of Digital Out of Home for Yahoo, who chairs our conferences, has done a great job in doing this. Typically, not many people notice it, and I suppose perhaps it's a good thing that it's not noticed and we don't bring attention to it. But if you look at any of the conferences we've done that people like Vistar Media have sponsored in the last couple of years, in New York and in North America and Toronto, we've always had more female speakers than male speakers, and that's, you tend not to notice it, which is probably a good thing. So if you look at the agendas, you don't see it necessarily, which is good. Leslie, you obviously got a lot out of that. You were one of the female speakers also speaking elsewhere. What's your take on doing the panel again in LA? I think Kim Sarubi is leading the panel in LA.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really refreshing to have the topic actually formally addressed in a room and at a conference that's not specifically focused on gender equality, because we have a lot of these conversations across the out-of-home industry, and it's usually in rooms that are only comprised of women. So it's nice to actually talk about it in a room that is more representative of the whole industry. And yeah, agreed, Irina. It was great to see how engaged the audience was and how many great questions there were. Even, someone from the audience kind of shared his own experience with imposter syndrome and really relating to some of the issues that the women on the panel were addressing. And I also think, Adrian, it's great that you guys do program your events that way, because in addition to actually talking about the issue itself, I think it is really important to just highlight women that are in leadership positions and are delivering real value and showcasing that, there are people in these positions and they're contributing and they have a voice, not just to talk about gender, but also their work as well. So it's great to have that balance of both.
Good.
Completely.
I think lots of people will probably know Marcy, who's now at T-Mobile Advertising. She is an industry veteran, Irina. You're allowed to say that about Marcy. And we love her. But I thought she had a very good point that she put across. But they were all very good. So you did a great job of selecting three good representatives of our industry, I think. Sean, you're the token man on this panel. I've always wanted to say that. What was your take on the audience? You weren't uncomfortable or anything, I guess.
No, I think I agree with both points that have made. I have the luxury of knowing these guys for a long time and believe a lot in what they do. I think as someone who's built an organization over the last couple of years, we've doubled in size in terms of headcount in the last 4 years. We have tried to be thoughtful about building a more diverse team at every level, at every role, not just in gender as well, in terms of we need a team that represents the world we live in. The agencies we call on, the brands we work with, the partnerships we build. Case of our network, we're in 205 DMAs, citizens of hundreds, if not thousands of local communities around the country. So more diverse voices in the room for any discussion ultimately leads to better outcomes. There's plenty of data, as Irina alluded to, there's plenty of data that demonstrates that. And you see it practically as well, especially with the pace of change in the media landscape. No one is a subject matter expert anymore, as much as maybe they think they once were, which is the pace of change. So building a more diverse team in every way is definitely a smarter way to do business these days.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm going to segue into Anna Beger's panel. Funnily enough, so Anna, of course, as you know, is the president and CEO of the OAAA. I'm laughing at myself. I shouldn't do this on camera. But when we were putting the agenda together, or Stephanie was putting the agenda together, at one point, when we build up block by block the pictures of the speakers and things, at one point every single speaker was female, including Anna, and it wasn't that Anna announced her panel that we had the first three men on the panel, which I just thought was quite strange. Sorry for that. And her panel was comprised of Andy Sarubis from Outfront Media, Barry Couples, of course, from Talent Outdoor, who's well known in the industry, and a late comer to the party, Paul Wilmington at Canvas Worldwide, who for some reason refused to wear a badge. I don't know why. It was his thing. He refused to wear a badge. But this was a great panel. Anna always puts together great panel sessions. There was a little bit of controversy perhaps with it, well, I'll start with you, Leslie. I'll give you the hardest thing to say. What was your thoughts about the panel? It was talking about share shift and how we move forward with getting more digital in the advertising bucket.
Yeah, I mean, maybe my perspective is a little different than others that were in the room. I actually didn't find it very controversial.
Okay.
It's not controversial to say we need to grow our industry. Of course we do. That's what we're doing as a business. I thought it was kind of interesting how over the course of the conversation, it sort of somehow evolved to then positioning out of home as being fighting against Google, which I don't think is an accurate description of where our industry is or how the media landscape works. It's not out of home or Google. That's not a choice anyone needs to make, particularly now that Google actually is in the out of home space and they have out of home available through their platform. But, you know, there were a lot of really great points about addressing some of the realities about the way our industry still works today. This was the AdTECH conference, and there's a lot of sectors of the overall out of home industry outside of programmatic that still need a lot of tech innovation to improve the way they operate. I know Andy always talks about the need for more automation, just even in the direct transactions that happen. And there hasn't really been a ton of progress on that front in a meaningful way to date. So calling that out and showcasing that, you know, I'm from a programmatic company, but programmatic is not actually the only solution to everything that the out-of-home industry needs to do. There are other areas for tech and for growth. But yeah, I think you know, it was always great to hear some different perspectives. And yeah, Anna always does a good job of kind of balancing the full spectrum of the out-of-home industry landscape.
Right. Sean, with GSTV, one of the reasons I love your network so much is that in the early days, you were so good at bringing in new brands and new advertisers to the space. I think you were doing it with couponing with one of the companies that you partnered with, or a holding company. What was your take on the session?
I love the panelists, love the group. I think it's a good discussion. I think this was the panel, if I recall right, where there was some debate on if digital out of home should be called that, if we should drop the digital and call it out of home, et cetera. And I think it's symptomatic of a more fundamental issue in terms of, you know, maybe a decade or so ago, there was this divergent fork in the road in the industry in terms of there's a good portion of people who are happy to sort of stay in the location-based, more real estate-driven business, which is a great business. There's nothing wrong with that. From its exit 1 mile ahead to Sunset Boulevard, big iconic canvases and signage. And to Leslie's point, there's ways to automate that workflow. But the sort of capital D digital part of digital out of home, that's audiences, measurement, targeting, context, et cetera. I think it's easier to talk about how the digital industry is broadening its remit to things like out of home, along with linear television, along with all sorts of other maybe traditional analog spaces, converse to try to convince the world that 100 years of history as they know it is different. And a billboard is now digital in the same way Google is digital, or TikTok is digital, and so on. So I think it's a good discussion. I think it's a conversation that needs to continue to happen. And I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong, but in terms of what you do, why you do it, how you build your business. In our case, we walk and talk more like I think people would think of as a digital video platform, because it's a full site sound motion experience. It's one-to-one, it's naturally frequency capped, et cetera, et cetera. But we have, in our case, I don't have any ego about how we're labeled. We get bought as broadcast video, digital out of home, increasingly retail media these days. And as a challenger platform, we don't have the luxury of picking only one of those lanes, right. Or to Leslie's point, saying, waking up one day and saying, you know, we're going to take on Google. I think there's plenty of investment to go around. So I think it was a great discussion, a worthy discussion, and I applauded all the sentiments. I think Paul's name tag thing is probably just everyone knows who Paul is at this point, but Barry and Andy come from two very different backgrounds, operationally and sort of agency driven. I think they drove a good discussion, and Anna obviously brings a pretty big digital overview coming from the IAB. So I thought it was a good discussion. I think it's an important one that needs to continue to happen, because these aren't technology problems to solve. They're product, in my mind, product marketing challenges to solve. We need to explain to the other 95% of the media industry how they should think about these changes in digital out of home, and think about them in the more digital sense, not the out of home sense.
Right. Yeah. A good point about IAB. I think Anna's background with the IAB was really good in the whole thing. That showed she obviously understands how it's going, but that was great that she had that and she brought that with her. Irina, you had some conversations with some people, I think, post-conference
I have
about this as well.
And about this, it was a really, it was a great panel in the sense where it was a conversation starter. Listen, I may not necessarily agree with some of the approaches, which is fine. But the fact is that, we're all bullish about the industry, right? But I think that the approach is a bit more delicate. It's not sort of pointing fingers. I think we need to, if anything, be a bit more inclusive. Leslie had a great panel about CTV and, with digital out of home as an example. The fact that we're even starting that conversation, and we're trying to understand where out of home fits into that ecosystem. And so, what I've learned throughout these conversations is that strong partnerships, right, are key. And it's what empowers brands in finding these environments like out of home, where they can create these meaningful moments and build these connections with audiences. And, I also think that, digital out of home is making the industry more nimble, and especially with the support of programmatic. And I think that COVID has taught us a lot about our industry, and especially, with the current economic uncertainties, and based on what we've learned throughout COVID with, how targeted out of home is, brands really do see digital out of home as a real opportunity due to this power and its flexibility. And, especially with the recent push in point of sales and retail. And, Sean talked about that during Ad Week. I think that we need to really leverage all of these golden nuggets, so to speak, that we have access to. And it also goes back to David Cavall and what he was saying during Leslie's panel. Sorry if I'm jumping forward, but it's really about educating all of the buyers, every person outside of the out-of-home industry, and really teach them the ecosystem and understand how 1 + 1 = 2, so to speak, and how digital out-of-home may complement CTV. So I think just the takeaway is, yes, let's be bullish about it, but let's not be so aggressive in our approach, and let's be more inclusive, and let's really demonstrate the value of this industry.
Right. Good. Thank you. We've actually talked about Leslie's session, which was, does digital out of home belong in the same media bucket as CTV? Did you feel that you got an answer to that question, Leslie?
Well, I think we definitely answered that this is something we need to be talking about. I think probably depending on who you were in the room, multiple people landed on an answer and they weren't the same answer.
Okay.
So, I think Amanda Shepley from Viant Adelphic, to me, offered a lot of really good points that from the buyer's perspective that the out-of-home industry needs to keep in mind, which is really considering why a brand chooses to invest in CTV media, and then finding ways that our channel can complement that or offer the same results and make that case to the buyer, rather than trying to kind of accidentally end up on an IO because we've relabeled our inventory. There's not a lot of value in that approach, but there's a ton of value in educating buyers that exactly as Sean said, there are networks like GSTV that have all the same criteria as CTV. It's content, it's a content driven experience. It's 1-to-1, full sight, sound, motion, frequency capped, all that. And there's a lot of work to be done on the awareness. And again, I actually agree, it is kind of a product marketing opportunity versus trying to kind of label out of home as something else, because I do think that sort of undercuts that there's a lot of value in out of home. We just need to kind of educate people about it and get them to think more differently.
Right. Good. And Sean, just to say, you were there, Sean, of course, but Dave Cavall, who's your VP of Digital Partnerships, was brilliant on the panel. So thanks for lending us to him for that particular session. What we've started to do, it's an innovation or initiative from Stephanie. We've started to do a lot more 15-minute sessions, fast, not quite TEDx type talks, but really 15-minute sharp sessions. We have 3 or 4 of them. And Leslie, thanks for putting that together at pretty much the last minute, I think, really, because we're struggling to fill a 15-minute slot, but you did a great job with that one. So just finishing up then, I'm going to ask each of you what you thought the best part of the morning was. Difficult one. You have to be nice, of course, because I'm not here on air, but just pretend I'm not here. Irina, what did you think was about the best part of the morning sessions?
Oh gosh, it's a toss-up. For me, I thought it was all great. I really enjoyed Leslie's panel, and it was another thought starter and a conversation starter. The takeaway from the panel for me was still the importance of educating programmatic buyers, as we're talking about, and trading desks and the values and reach of digital out of home. And I also thought, we didn't talk about this, but I thought that the PepsiCo and Adomni discussion was also great. I mean, it was digital out of home playing a really big part in PepsiCo's digital strategy. And the crazy thing here is that they had never tested digital out of home before until this programmatic campaign. And so I thought this was, it was fascinating to see, how they utilized out of home. And I sincerely hope that other brands were really listening, because it was a perfect example of retail being a really great example in the industry, how it increases brand recall, store visitations, brand opinion, et cetera. So it's hard to select one. I think I got a lot out of it. But yeah, those 2 obviously stood out for me.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning PepsiCo. I like the PepsiCo chat with Adomni. I was having a chat with the PepsiCo guy when he arrived. He didn't go into the session straight away. I don't think he was nervous, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't quite sure when he walked into the room of 100 AdTech people. I don't think he really knew. I think he's being fed to the lion's den or something. I wasn't quite sure what he was expecting. But he was brilliant, and Adomni treated him really well, and it's good to get brands there. So that was good. That was probably one of my favorites, along with, I like Foursquare. I like the idea of this. I remember Foursquare when I used to be mayor of Henley-on-Thames and mayor of this and mayor of that. They've changed a lot since then. But from a location-based company, I think that they're a great company, and I like hearing from them. Sean?
I'll give kudos to Stephanie for curating, I think, a great morning of a variety of voices, people who have grown up in the out-of-home sector, people who have grown up in ad tech, brands, agencies, strategy planners, direct clients. I think that's what we're talking about, is trying to understand where the world is going. So you have to do that with a variety of perspectives. I think, when I read ad tech, digital out of home, I think about ad tech as all the things Leslie and her great team, pioneer, and then I think out of home. I think like most people do, that means the billboard world. And I think as we saw that morning, there was an important debate about sort of digital out of home isn't just signs that became screens. Digital media is a whole lot of other things. So I thought it was a good challenger morning of debates. And I think it's the kind of questions that need to continue to be asked. And I think for a lot of them, there's not a right or wrong answer. This is how people need to apply them. I think the CTV panel is a great example of that. It's CTV to a lot of people means long form programming on the living room wall. And that alone, addressable video on a mobile device, a social media feed, screen outside the home means something totally different. So thought it was a good morning of challenging discussions that make people walk away and think about how does it apply to their business and their day-to-day life and their teams, which is good. That's all you can ask of a half-day conference in New York, for sure.
Good. Thank you, Sean. Leslie, last but not least.
Yeah, I love the events that you put together. Adrian and Stephanie always does such a great job, both curating the agenda, but also then leading us through it, keeping us on track, et cetera. But I think that this event is unique because it is a smaller room and it is mostly tech people or media owners. And I think it was great that it did turn into more of a discussion rather than just sitting and listening to presented content. And I think that's what, the value of this event is, and keeping it specific. It's not meant to be the same as the OAAA show or the DPAA one or Advertising Week. It's ad tech out of home. So let's get into the weeds, actually, have some arguments and, disagree about stuff. But I think I enjoyed that there was a little bit more of that discussion. And at the end, also kind of asking everyone in the room what their takeaways were or highlights, always kind of sparked some interesting points of view, and definitely those follow-up conversations that happen after the fact. So yeah, I think definitely we can it leans into your strength, Adrian, being a little controversial. So I enjoyed that.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time. I think our time is probably up. It leads us neatly into the fact that we've got a Silicon Beach conference, AdTech Out of Home, our first one in Silicon Beach, with the help of the OAAA, who've encouraged us to move out a little bit of New York. We did Miami earlier in the year. So that's on November the 15th. I know I'll see Leslie there because she's speaking again. And I know that we've got another Women in Tech panel. Thank you, Irina, because you've started that for us, and the ball will continue rolling. The ball will continue to roll. That's bad, but whatever. And Sean, for the last event we just done, thank you for letting your staff come along and present. I know it takes a lot of time for people to prepare, but we really appreciate you as a CEO of offering your people to our conferences. So I'd like to thank you all. We'll call that a wrap. Thank you, Irina. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Leslie.